I still remember the sound of that call, the way her voice cut through my quiet afternoon like a blade. "You don't do anything anymore," she said. "I'm dropping the kids off tomorrow. You'll manage." Then she laughed. Not kindly, not respectfully, just laughed as if I had become her household help instead of her husband's mother. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply said, "All right," and hung up the phone. But behind that calm reply was a storm she never saw coming. Because when she returned from her trip, she didn't walk back into the same home she had left her children in. She walked into a reckoning. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. That call wasn't just a favor gone wrong. It was the spark that lit the end of her control over me, over this family, and over the respect she thought she could command without earning. And if you think you know how a quiet, retired woman might respond to being used, stay till the end. Because what I did next didn't just teach her a lesson. It changed the entire family forever. Some people learn through kindness, others only through consequence. By the time she came back, she couldn't believe what she saw. So don't look away now. You'll want to hear this to the very last word, because if you've ever been taken for granted, this story will feel uncomfortably familiar. And if you haven't subscribed yet, ask yourself, why would you watch someone else's strength and not support it? Go on, subscribe now. Those who don't, well, they'll be the ones left in the comments, explaining why they stayed silent when they should have stood up. My name is Margaret Holloway, though most people in our little town just call me Mrs. H. I'm 68, a retired elementary school teacher from a small town in Ohio. For 35 years, I stood in front of classrooms filled with restless children, teaching them how to write their names, sound out words, and believe that kindness still mattered. My husband, Robert, was a factory foreman, hardworking, quiet, dependable. We built a simple life, one paycheck at a time. When he passed away 15 years ago, it felt like someone had taken the laughter right out of the walls. But grief has a way of reshaping you. I learned to keep moving, to find meaning in smaller joys. I poured all that love into our only son, David, the boy who made every sacrifice worth it. David grew up into everything we dreamed he'd be. Smart, ambitious, polite, or at least that's who I raised. He went to college on a scholarship, landed a job in the city, and before long, he called me with the news every mother waits for. He'd met someone. Her name was Lindsay. At first, I was happy for him. She was bright, confident, well-spoken. She had that city polish that made people stop and listen when she entered a room. I remember thinking, my boy finally found someone who challenges him. But over time, something in her smile began to change. It wasn't unkind, just measured, like every word and gesture came with calculation. Still, I brushed it off. You tell yourself, she's young, she'll learn. She just needs time. They married a year later and had 3 beautiful children. Ethan, the oldest, always curious. Maddie, who adored her father. And little Owen, still learning his words. For a while, I visited often, baking cookies, helping with birthdays, reading bedtime stories. But somewhere along the line, Lindsay's warmth cooled. My offers to help were met with polite rejection, then with silence, then with that same dismissive phrase, "You don't need to trouble yourself, Mom." I began to realize that my place in their lives was quietly shrinking, the way a picture fades in sunlight. Before that call, my days were simple. I'd wake up to sunlight slipping through lace curtains, the smell of coffee filling my small kitchen, and the sound of birds arguing over crumbs on the porch. Retirement wasn't a burden to me, it was peace earned after decades of sacrifice. I had spent 35 years teaching children how to read, how to listen, how to care. My reward was quiet, the kind of quiet you only understand when your life has been full of noise and duty. I'd take slow walks around the garden every morning, running my fingers over the rosemary and mint I planted the year Robert passed. His picture sat by the window, the frame a little tarnished, but his smile still alive. Losing him was the hardest thing I ever faced, but I kept going because of David. Raising him alone wasn't easy. There were nights when I worked 2 jobs, came home exhausted, and still found the strength to check his homework. He turned out exactly how his father dreamed he would: driven, respected, and kind, or at least that's what I wanted to believe. He called often at first, telling me about his promotion, his growing family, the home they bought just a few hours away. I'd smile through every conversation, pretending I didn't notice how each call became shorter than the last. In those early retirement months, I learned to fill my own time. I joined a community group, volunteered at the library, and taught a few local seniors how to use their phones. It wasn't glamorous, but it made me feel useful, grounded, seen. The neighbors waved when they saw me tending to my flowers, and sometimes I'd share tomatoes from my garden with the widower across the street. My world was small, but it was mine, and I was content. I thought I had earned the right to rest, to live softly. I never imagined that peace could be mistaken for idleness, that someone in my own family would look at my calm life and see weakness instead of grace. The truth is, I carried pride in every wrinkle, every silver strand of hair. Each one told a story of persistence of a woman who built her life without shortcuts or excuses. Robert used to say, "When people forget what you've done, life will remind them for you." I didn't know then how true that would become. Looking back now, maybe that's why her words, "You don't do anything anymore," cut so deep, because she hadn't seen the chapters before this one. She didn't know the nights I went hungry so her husband could eat. She didn't see the sacrifices layered quietly beneath my calm smile. That week before her call, I had just finished planting new roses by the fence. The house smelled of lavender polish and old books, my favorite scent in the world. I remember sitting by the window, a cup of tea in my hand, feeling grateful that after so many storms, I had finally found stillness. But peace doesn't always last. Sometimes it's just the pause before the lesson life needs you to teach. And as I sit here, recalling those calm days, the quiet mornings, the laughter from my volunteering group, the sound of David's voice fading from one call to the next, I realize now how fragile peace can be when others mistake it for passivity. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what happened next will make you question how well your own family sees you. And if you've ever worked your entire life for people who later acted like your efforts didn't count, stay till the end. What you'll hear might just remind you of your own worth. And to those watching without subscribing, ask yourself why stand outside when you could be part of something that reminds you how strong you truly are. Those who don't will end up in the comments, explaining why they hesitated when all they had to do was click one button to stand beside a story that speaks for them. I didn't know it yet, but that peaceful chapter, the gardening, the volunteering, the quiet evenings, was about to close, and the next one would test every bit of strength I thought I no longer needed. When the doorbell rang the next morning, I was still in my robe, sipping my tea and tending to my African violets by the kitchen window. Through the glass, I saw a black SUV roll into the driveway, its engine humming impatiently. Lindsay stepped out, designer sunglasses, phone in one hand, her other hand shoving the car door closed with her hip. My heart sank. No greeting, no smile. Just a cold, rushed presence that carried more attitude than warmth. She opened the trunk, and before I could even reach the porch, 3 suitcases hit the concrete with a dull thud. "They just ate," she said flatly, not meeting my eyes. "Snacks are in the bag. Don't let them stay up too late. I'll be back in a week." Then she turned on her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as if to punctuate her disregard. The car door slammed. The SUV disappeared down the street. And just like that, silence until the front door creaked open and I saw them. My grandchildren. Or rather, the children I used to know. They didn't run to me like they used to. No hugs. No, "Hi, Grandma." Just 3 little heads bent over glowing tablets, thumbs moving at lightning speed, faces blank with digital trance. The youngest, Emma, 4 years old, mumbled something I couldn't hear without looking up. The middle one, Liam, 7, flopped onto my couch and started complaining that my Wi-Fi was too slow. And the oldest, Noah, 9, didn't even take out his earbuds. "Take your shoes off, sweetheart," I said softly. "We don't wear them inside." He didn't respond, just turned up the volume. My heart clenched. I stood there, still holding my teacup, wondering when the laughter in this house had turned into background noise. These were the same children I used to bake cookies with, who'd beg me to read Goodnight Moon twice before bed. Now, they couldn't even look at me. They called me the boring grandma before the day was over. I heard it through a whisper between them, followed by a giggle that stung more than it should have. Lindsay had turned them into strangers, polite only when they wanted something, dismissive every other moment. At dinner, I cooked their favorite meal at least. What used to be their favorite, chicken pot pie and mashed potatoes. They poked at it, unimpressed. Mom says we don't eat stuff like this, Noah said, pushing his plate away. It's unhealthy. I smiled through the ache in my chest. When I raised your dad, we didn't have fancy protein bars or those delivery meals, I said gently. We had love, prayer, and food made from scratch. But my words floated into the air and vanished like smoke. That night, after they'd fallen asleep, screens glowing faintly beside their pillows, I sat in my quiet kitchen and stared at the note Lindsay had left on the counter. Just one line, scribbled carelessly. Remember, you're retired. You've got the time. My hand trembled as I folded that note. This wasn't about babysitting. This was about power, control, diminishing me to someone disposable, a stand-in caretaker for the life she wanted to escape. And as I sat there, surrounded by half-eaten dinners and the faint hum of electronics, I realized something I hadn't in years. I wasn't powerless. She had made one mistake. She underestimated me. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because trust me, what happened next will make you question just how far one grandmother will go to reclaim her respect. By the second day, the peaceful rhythm of my home had turned into something I didn't recognize. Cereal spilled across the floor like confetti. Juice stains decorated my couch. The air smelled of chips and sticky fingers. The once quiet mornings filled with birdsong and soft jazz now echoed with screams, crashes, and the endless drone of cartoon voices. Emma threw a tantrum because I wouldn't let her eat candy for breakfast. Liam broke the handle of my favorite teacup, the one my late husband had given me on our last anniversary, and shrugged it off with a careless, "It's just a cup." Noah locked himself in the guest room because I wouldn't give him my phone charger. I tried to remind myself they were just children, but each passing hour made that harder to believe. It wasn't just misbehavior. It was entitlement, a kind I couldn't recognize, one that reeked of Lindsay's voice behind it. That afternoon, while folding their laundry, I heard muffled laughter coming from the kitchen. The kids had left a tablet connected to a video call. I froze when I saw Lindsay's face on the screen. She was talking to my son, my only son, the man I had raised alone. "Relax," she was saying, her tone dripping with arrogance. "Your mom's too desperate to say no. She's probably thrilled to feel useful again. Let her have this." My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear his response. But I didn't need to. His silence said enough. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't even trying. I pressed my hand against the counter, steadying myself as her laughter filled the kitchen, the kind of laughter that cuts through the heart like glass. For a moment, I couldn't move. All those years, I had worked 2 jobs to put him through college. The nights I stayed up sick with worry when he first left home. The love I poured into every sacrifice, all of it reduced to too desperate to say no. When the call ended, I just stood there, staring at the black screen reflecting my face. I didn't recognize that woman staring back at me, tired, humiliated, invisible. The children ran past, laughing, chasing each other with markers, leaving streaks on my walls. I didn't even stop them. Not yet. I walked into my bedroom, shut the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands were trembling, but not from anger, from clarity. That was the moment I decided. This wouldn't be another week of humiliation. I had spent my life teaching compassion, patience, and forgiveness. But now, I was going to teach something else: consequence. I wasn't doing this out of bitterness. I was doing it to remind them of something they had all forgotten: that love is not servitude, and respect is not optional. Before we go further, let me tell you this. If you've ever felt taken for granted by your own family, if you've ever given everything only to be treated like nothing, then don't scroll past this video. Subscribe right now, because what I did next will make every grandmother who's ever been dismissed stand a little taller. That night, after the children had finally fallen asleep, each curled up in front of a glowing screen they refused to let go of. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and a calm I hadn't felt in days. The storm outside had quieted, but the real one had just begun inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I stared at the mess around me, crumbs, toys, crumpled snack wrappers, and felt something shift. If they wanted a babysitter, they were about to get one. Just not the kind they expected. The next morning, I woke up before the Sunday. I opened the windows wide, letting in fresh air and light. The scent of early dew drifted through the curtains, replacing the stale smell of junk food and chaos. I swept the floors, scrubbed the counters, and folded every blanket with care. I didn't do it for them. I did it for myself, to reclaim the space that had once been my sanctuary. Then I cooked breakfast from scratch. Scrambled eggs, whole grain toast, sliced fruit, and warm oatmeal. No sugar-laden cereal, no processed snacks. When the kids came down, rubbing their eyes and complaining about the lack of Wi-Fi, I greeted them with a gentle smile. "Good morning," I said. "Breakfast is ready." Noah frowned. "Can I have Pop-Tarts instead?" I shook my head slowly. "Not in this house, sweetheart." There was no yelling, no threats, just calm authority. After breakfast, I unplugged the router, coiled the cable neatly, and placed it in my dresser drawer. The silence that followed was almost musical. At first, there were protests. "Grandma, the Wi-Fi's not working. I can't watch my show. What am I supposed to do now?" I didn't answer. Instead, I handed each of them a small list I had written on the back of an old envelope. Make your bed, brush your teeth, water the garden, help with lunch. Their eyes widened as if I'd handed them a map to another planet. "If I'm going to be your babysitter," I said softly, "then I'll be the kind who makes you remember what family really means." At first, they resisted. There were eye rolls, groans, and complaints. But I didn't waver. I smiled through it all, humming quietly as I went about my day. I turned off the television, hid the tablets, and replaced their snacks with bowls of fruit. The house began to breathe again. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the energy shifted. The children didn't know it yet, but I was teaching them something their parents hadn't. I wasn't punishing them. I was reintroducing them to life without screens, noise, or entitlement. It was time for them to remember how to talk, how to listen, and how to be part of something bigger than themselves. That night, when I tucked Emma into bed, she asked in a sleepy voice, "Grandma, what do people do when there's no Wi-Fi?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They talk, sweetheart. They laugh. They tell stories. They live." For the first time since they'd arrived, she smiled back an honest, unguarded smile. And as I turned off the light, I felt a quiet triumph rise within me. This was only the beginning. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos, because what happened next will remind every parent and grandparent watching that sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. By the third morning, the chaos had begun to fade into something quieter, something softer. I could see it in the way they hesitated before turning on a screen, or how they lingered a bit longer at the breakfast table before running off. That was when I decided to introduce structure: gentle, steady, and firm. After breakfast, I gathered them all in the living room. The sun streamed through the curtains, lighting up dust particles in the air like tiny golden stars. "Starting today," I said, "we're doing things a little differently. Every day will have its rhythm, just like when your daddy was little." Their faces told me they weren't thrilled, but I wasn't asking for approval. "We'll start with chores, simple ones. Then we'll have some fun. I'll tell you stories before bed, the kind my mother told me when I was your age." Emma crossed her arms. "Do we have to?" I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, you do, and you might just enjoy it." That first day was hard. Noah spilled water on the floor while trying to water the plants, and Ben groaned as he carried laundry to the washing machine. Emma pouted while drying dishes, but I stayed calm, steady. I knew habits weren't built in a day. By the second afternoon, something remarkable began to happen. Noah asked how long it took for a tomato to grow. Ben started sweeping the porch without being asked. And Emma, my proud little one, began setting the table, arranging each fork and napkin like it was an art project. It was small, but it was progress. When the evenings came, I gathered them in the living room, the glow of the fireplace flickering against the walls. The television stayed off. I pulled out an old tin box filled with handwritten stories and family photos. "Tonight," I said, "we're going to tell stories instead of watching them." The children groaned at first, but then sat closer. I began with tales about their grandfather, how he'd served in the Navy, how he'd proposed to me under the stars with nothing but a paper ring he folded from his ration card. Their eyes grew wide, curiosity slowly pushing boredom away. Days passed. Laughter began to echo through the house again. They started calling me Grandma instead of the boring lady. They sang while washing dishes, and one afternoon I caught them racing each other through the garden, shouting my name as if it meant safety. Something inside me swelled a quiet, tender pride. They were remembering what it meant to belong. Then, one rainy afternoon, while cleaning the attic, Ben found an old wooden box tucked behind some blankets. He brought it down, his hands dusty, eyes wide. "Grandma, what's this?" I froze for a moment. Inside that box were letters old, yellowed, tied with a faded blue ribbon. They were from my late husband. Letters he'd written during his deployment, filled with words of love, fear, and hope for a family he might never see again. I watched as Ben carefully opened one, the paper trembling in his small hands. He began to read aloud, "My dearest Mary." His voice cracked slightly as he continued. The children listened in silence. When he finished, Noah whispered, "He sounds brave." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. He was. Everything you see here, this home, this garden, your father's education, it all came from his sacrifices. Your mother never knew this side of me, but now you will. For the first time, they didn't fidget or reach for a tablet. They sat still, letting the weight of history and love sink in. Emma crawled closer, resting her head on my arm. "Grandma," she said softly, "can we read another one tomorrow?" My voice shook a little when I answered, "Yes, sweetheart, tomorrow, and the day after that." That night, as I watched them fall asleep on the couch, heads resting on each other's shoulders, I realized something powerful was happening. They weren't just learning manners, they were rediscovering their roots. My house was no longer a battlefield. It was becoming a home again. Before we go further, let me ask you this. How many times have we let convenience replace connection? How many memories have been lost to screens and silence? Don't be one of those who forgets what truly matters. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the next part of this story will remind you that love, once buried, can still find its way back to the surface. And for those who choose not to subscribe, go into the comments and tell us why. Tell us what holds you back from being part of something that could change how families connect again. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind that carried a hush of anticipation. The sun sat lower in the sky, casting warm stripes of light across the front porch. I was in the kitchen, finishing up a pot of chicken stew, when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. The moment I had been waiting for had arrived sooner than I expected. Lindsay had come home early. I wiped my hands on a towel and took a deep breath. The house was calm. The air smelled of home-cooked food and fresh linen. The children were sitting outside, each with a book in hand. Emma curled up on the swing, Ben tracing his finger across the words, Noah reading aloud softly to the dog that had decided to become their companion. Their laughter was gentle, not wild. It was peaceful. The house, once filled with noise and disobedience, now felt alive with a kind of grace I hadn't felt in years. Lindsay stepped out of the car wearing her usual designer sunglasses, the sound of her heels sharp against the pavement. She glanced around, confusion flickering across her face. "Where are they?" she called, her tone impatient. "Kids?" No one answered immediately. Then Emma looked up, smiled, and said, "We're right here, Mom." Lindsay froze. She looked from one child to the next, her expression faltering as she took in the sight before her. No tablets, no mess, no screaming. Just 3 children sitting quietly, reading, the smell of home-cooked food drifting through the open window. When she walked into the house, she stopped at the doorway. The kitchen counters gleamed, the floors were spotless, and the table was already set for dinner plates neatly arranged, napkins folded, candles ready to be lit. What is this?" she muttered. "Where's the chaos?" Her voice cracked slightly as she walked through the house that once overwhelmed her. Every corner spoke of order, of warmth, of effort. And then, from the living room, another voice spoke deeper, quieter, familiar. "It's home, Lindsay, the one you forgot existed." Her husband, my son, Michael, stood near the mantelpiece, holding a letter in his hand. He had arrived just an hour before her. He'd called me after reading the note I sent him, his voice trembling with something I hadn't heard in years, remorse. Lindsay's eyes darted between us. "You're here? What's going on?" He handed her the letter, his gaze heavy but calm. "You should read this." She unfolded it slowly, her hands shaking. My words, written in my careful handwriting, stared back at her. "This house taught me how to raise a man who forgot where he came from. Maybe it can remind you both." Lindsay's lips trembled as she finished reading. The silence that followed was thick, but not angry. It was the kind of silence that forces you to see the truth you've been running from. I watched as my son placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Mom's been trying to tell us something we didn't want to hear," he said softly. "We lost something along the way, Lindsay. And somehow, she helped our kids find it again." Lindsay looked around the room at the family photos on the wall, at the clean table, at her children's laughter floating in from the porch, and for the first time, I saw her eyes soften. Her voice cracked when she said, "I don't even know how to thank you." I stepped closer, my tone kind but firm. "You don't need to thank me, you just need to remember what really matters. The world will teach your children enough about ambition and pride. It's our job to teach them love and respect." She nodded slowly, the weight of her arrogance melting away bit by bit. Outside, the children called for her to join them. She hesitated, then stepped out, sitting beside them on the porch swing. For a moment, I stood by the doorway, watching the family I had nearly lost rediscover itself not through lectures or punishment, but through patience and example. The sun had begun to set, bathing the yard in gold. My son turned to me and said quietly, "You were right, Mom. You always were." I smiled and placed a gentle hand on his cheek. "No, Michael. I just remembered what you once knew. Before we go further, let me remind you, family isn't built on convenience. It's built on effort, forgiveness, and courage. If this moment touched something in you, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will show you the full circle of redemption. And for those who still haven't subscribed, tell us in the comments what's stopping you from being part of a community that reminds us all of the power of standing up for family, for love, and for respect. The moment of calm didn't last long. Lindsay sat stiffly on the porch, her back straight, her pride fighting to breathe beneath the weight of what she'd just witnessed. The children's laughter filled the air, too honest, too pure, and it seemed to irritate her. She shifted uncomfortably, crossing her arms. "So, what is this supposed to be?" she said sharply, glancing at me through narrowed eyes. "Some kind of performance? You think a few home-cooked meals and bedtime stories make up for—" "Lindsay," Michael interrupted, his voice firm. "Stop." She blinked, startled. He had never spoken to her like that before. The words hung in the air, quiet but heavy. He took a step forward, his tone steady but filled with something raw. "This isn't about performance. Look at them." He pointed toward the children. "They're calm, happy, they're grounded. Mom didn't just watch them, she changed them." Lindsay scoffed, though her voice trembled. "Oh, please. You're exaggerating. They're just kids. They'll go back to normal in a few days." I stood there silently, hands folded in front of me. I had no anger left, only clarity. "Lindsay," I said gently, "normal isn't what children deserve. They deserve better than being distracted into silence." Her jaw tightened, eyes flicking away. "You think you know better than me? You think—" "I don't think," I said quietly. "I know." The air shifted. Even the children seemed to sense it, their laughter fading as they turned to listen. "You thought I had nothing left to give," I continued, my voice calm but unwavering. "But wisdom, love, and respect, those are things money can't buy. You dropped off your children to be watched. I raised them instead." Lindsay's lips parted, but no words came. Her face softened, her eyes wet with something she couldn't hide. For a moment, she looked less like the confident woman who had mocked me over the phone, and more like a daughter who had lost her way. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low. "She's right, Lindsay. I've been so focused on work, on everything that doesn't matter, that I forgot the woman who made all of this possible. The woman who held this family together long before either of us knew what sacrifice meant." Tears began to stream down Lindsay's face, quiet and unrestrained. She looked at me and whispered, "I didn't mean to disrespect you. I I thought you wanted to feel needed. I smiled faintly. I didn't want to be needed, dear. I wanted to be remembered. There's a difference. The silence that followed was deep, filled with emotion and understanding. Michael stepped closer and took my hands in his. Mom, he said softly, I'm sorry. For the years I didn't visit enough. For letting pride come before gratitude. You were right about everything. I squeezed his hands gently. You don't need to be sorry. You just need to be better. Lindsay looked toward the children, their eyes bright, their faces peaceful, and then back at me. How did you do it? She asked quietly. By listening, I said simply. By showing them that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And love isn't given when convenient, it's given always. For a long while, no one spoke. The air was heavy, but it was no longer tense. It was healing. Lindsay finally reached out, her hand trembling as she took mine. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on them, or on me. I met her gaze and nodded. Just promise me one thing, I said, that when they look back on their childhood, they'll remember more than screens and schedules. They'll remember moments like this. Michael turned toward his wife, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. We will, he said, we'll make it right. And in that moment, as the setting sun bathed the porch in a golden glow, something unspoken passed between us. Forgiveness, fragile but real. For the first time in years, I felt my family truly present, not out of obligation, but out of love. Before we go deeper, let me ask you something. How many times have you stayed silent when you should have spoken your truth? Don't let another day pass without standing for what you believe in. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will prove that redemption isn't about words, it's about action. And if you still haven't subscribed, go to the comments and tell us. Why? Tell us what's holding you back from joining a place where stories like this remind us of what family really means. After that day, the silence in my home no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. The air was lighter, the walls warmer, and for the first time in a long while, I could breathe without that ache in my chest. Lindsay began to come around more often. Not to drop the children off and rush away, but to stay. She started bringing homemade pies, asking how I was, and helping the kids with their schoolwork at the kitchen table. The visits weren't perfect. Awkward pauses lingered at first, but there was effort. And effort meant hope. The children had changed, too. They ran through the door shouting, "Grandma!" their laughter echoing through every corner of the house. They helped set the table, picked flowers from the garden, and proudly showed me their drawings. Sometimes I'd catch Lindsay standing by the doorway, watching them, her eyes soft and a little wet. She never said it out loud, but I knew she was grateful. I didn't remind her of the past, and I didn't hold it over her. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about choosing not to let it poison the peace I had worked so hard to build. There were moments quiet, beautiful ones that told me everything had changed. The smell of cookies baking with the children's laughter in the background, the sound of Lindsay humming while washing dishes, the sight of my son repairing the old porch swing with his daughter by his side. As I watched them, I thought about how easily we take love for granted, how quickly we forget the hands that once held us up when life felt too heavy. People forget your value sometimes, not because it isn't there, but because they've grown too used to seeing you stand strong. That's when I realized something powerful. Retirement didn't make me useless. It gave me time. Time to reflect, to heal, to stand tall without needing anyone's permission. It made me powerful enough to choose peace, even when others offered chaos. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't anger or punishment, it's grace. Quiet, unshakable grace that teaches others how to be better simply by example. As the days went on, our home filled with laughter again. The garden bloomed brighter. The evenings were softer, and though the past still whispered now and then, it no longer had the power to wound. Because I had found something stronger than anger. I had found peace, and I chose to live in it. Sometimes, people forget your value until you remind them not with anger, but with grace. Retirement didn't make me useless. It made me powerful enough to choose peace. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. I stood in my garden, my hands brushing through the lavender bushes I had planted years ago. The children's laughter carried across the yard, that bright, innocent sound that fills a home with life. They chased each other around the birdbath, their cheeks flushed with joy, while Lindsay sat on the porch steps, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, everything felt right. The soil beneath my hands, the sound of wind rustling through the leaves, the smell of freshly baked bread drifting from the kitchen. It was all a reminder that peace doesn't come to you. You create it, one act of courage at a time. I looked around me and thought about everything that had happened, the hurt, the disrespect, the quiet strength it took to turn it all into something beautiful. I hadn't set out to humiliate anyone. I only wanted to reclaim my dignity, to remind my family and myself that love has boundaries and respect must be earned, not demanded. Lindsay had learned her lesson, yes, but in teaching her, I found something even greater. I found the woman I used to be, strong, patient, unshakable, and full of grace. The children ran up to me, holding wildflowers they had picked. "These are for you, Grandma," they said. I took them gently, feeling my heart swell. "Thank you," I whispered, though in that moment I wasn't just thanking them. I was thanking life for giving me the chance to begin again, to grow, to forgive, and to love without losing myself. As the evening light softened, I sat on the porch and watched my family no longer fractured, but healing. Lindsay met my gaze and nodded quietly. No words were needed. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was understanding. And as I looked out over my garden, the same one I had tended alone for years, I realized this was the lesson all along. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply smiles and says, "I will still choose peace." I didn't just teach her a lesson. I reminded myself who I've always been. If you've ever had to stand up for yourself, especially to family, tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that prove one simple truth: it's never too late to take back your peace.